Welcome to the Intelligent Investing Podcast, where modern portfolio theory can suck it. A student of the School of Graham and Doddsville and a clergy member of the Church of Warren Buffett, here's your host, Eric Schleien.
Hi, this is Eric Schleien. You are listening to the Intelligent Investing Podcast, and today we have David Yarus on the show. Welcome, David.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so you have a pretty interesting story. You founded a company called JSwipe, which was like the way that I would describe it is like a Jewish Tinder. I hope that that's the way that you would describe it, but if not, you can tell me. And then you also started an interesting company called mllnnl, which is a millennial branding agency. And there's lots of questions I have, but yeah, welcome. I'm very honored to have you on the show. I find you a fascinating individual and kind of awesome, and happy to have you on. So welcome.
Thanks, my man. I'm happy to dive in. Let's do it.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how you started JSwipe, how you started mllnnl, kind of maybe just a little bit of background about you. High level background, grew up in Miami Beach, Florida, went to Babson with you in Boston, moved to New York in 2010 for a dream job at the time. And to be honest, to meet a nice Jewish girl. And I moved to the Upper West Side because I was told that that's where they all lived. And I did all the things, and it just wasn't really, exciting. It was like shockingly socially awkward. And, essentially around that time, Tinder came out and really disrupted the connection space. But obviously had a little bit of a branding issue. And if someone, in my case, Tinder had a bit of a branding issue.
It's funny. Basically, what happened was Tinder started by two young guys out in California. They didn't start with the business plan of being a hookup app. Really, what happened is they were just so innovative and took it they leapfrogged so far forward where the industry was at that time that people were first of all caught off guard. It disrupted the entire way that people connected through online or app dating, and it made it so easy to meet and connect that I believe people and pop culture turned Tinder in to what it became earlier on, although now of course we're pretty much through that. We're living in a more normalized dating app culture era.
There was a stigma behind it where don't tell anyone that we met off Tinder, and I don't know, I've never done this before, I hope you don't think it's weird. There was all of that in the background.
For sure. And it was around that time where for me, finding, meeting, being with someone Jewish is important to me. And a tool like Tinder, while it was great and blew up globally for sort of, let's call it niche audiences, or finding someone specific who in this case was Jewish, wasn't convenient, natural, or it was just basically you didn't know. So either you had to use that as your opening line, hey, are you Jewish? Which is obviously not a fun, engaging opening.
Right.
Or you don't know, and then you maybe, talk for a while, get offline, then find out. But frankly, that's really not, responsible or respectful to either person or their time. Yeah. And then ultimately, I saw the technology. I thought it was incredible. And nothing really existed like that specific to millennials in the Jewish community. And so set out to build and, launch the first Jewish swipe dating app. We launched in Passover 2014. And it was a combination of, thank God, right place, right time, right team, right execution, a lot of hustle, a lot of, blessing and some luck. But we have now since, a few years later, we've grown to over 1 million users around the world. We're the largest and, most engaged Jewish dating app. We've had thousands of, marriages and, billions of swipes and tens of or hundreds of millions of matches. It's beautiful. It's been an incredible journey, wild experience, pretty much totally unexpected, but it's been really rewarding and meaningful to work on. So that's the main project over the last 5 years.
And for full disclosure, I think you know this, but I met my girlfriend through JSwipe.
I love that.
Yeah. Mazel. And she's actually coming to visit in a few hours from New York to come visit.
Well, tell her I say hello and mazel tov.
I could actually hear her saying that right back to you.
Perfect.
I will. I'm sure she'll be listening to this when this gets published as well. But right, yeah. So yeah, I figured, when we started dating, I would bring on the founder of whatever
whatever platform that was. So, if it was Tinder, I'd have brought on the founders of Tinder, but it was JSwipe, so I brought on, someone cooler.
Well, I am honored to be here.
I'm honored to have you. Very cool. And so how did you assemble this team for JSwipe when there was nothing there?
So really, I think it's a great case of the strength and loose ties, right? Basically, I'm definitely not a techie, or let's call it, at the very least, I'm not the developer. Although I definitely wish that while I was growing up, I did nothing in life other than learn how to code. But it's basically a combination of just amazing people who knew amazing people. I linked up with a buddy from Babson who was already working on a separate technology, a separate app, for a totally different space with two of his buddies. We got together. It made sense, for them to pivot and to sort of double down on this vision and direction, and the rest is history. So it's basically, beautiful, and networks of people who you never would have thought that, would be the people that ultimately, change, either, basically it's people that I would have never expected or known otherwise, but the world and circumstance brought us together in this moment, and it's been, a beautiful experience.
Yeah. So I feel like you are kind of the perfect marketer because you genuinely are interested in how to connect with other people and how people can connect with other people and how brands can connect with other people. Would you say that's accurate?
It's the most inspiring, fascinating thing, to me.
Right. Does it piss you off when you see people in the marketing field that are just like sleaze bags and it's all about manipulation for them?
No, I mean, I don't know. What makes me feel funnier is in the marketing world, I feel like there's genuine, authentic connection and, I don't know, intention. Yep. And then there's agencies and, marketers or really sales guys that are just in it because at the end of the day, marketing is somewhat fluffy, right? Messaging, sentiment, yes, now everything in my world is data-driven with performance marketing. So it's no longer like the world of fully fluff. Yep. But, so there were some places that I had either witnessed or worked briefly where it was just all about selling the next, pitch of some, campaign, so you could just basically maximize dollars into the agency. And not that, whereas, Millennial, the other business that I'm working on and have been working on for about 5 years as well, it's like we're all pretty passionate about whatever project we're working on. By the time we take on a project, it's already vetted for, is it aligned with our interests? Is it aligned with what we're excited about? Is it a brand that we believe in? Okay, check, great. Now let's explore how to help co-create the businesses we believe in. And so we're all pretty, invested in the mission, in the success of our clients. And so yeah, we're really, engaged. Does it piss me off when I see marketers who aren't? Not honestly. Hopefully, I try not to be impacted by that.
Okay.
I don't try not to collaborate, engage. They're not in my sort of sphere. But they definitely exist, and I think it's important for businesses, entrepreneurs, decision makers to really poke a little bit deeper than just like a fancy pitch, because everyone, or not everyone, but people are really good, especially marketers, at making you believe and think what they want you to believe and think. Right. So you have to sort of pierce that a little bit to get into the the core of who are they, what do they believe in, what do they care about, is this, etc. You get the gist.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Seth Godin's work?
Of course.
Yeah. So are you? You sound like you would be very aligned with him. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I like Seth Godin. Okay. I learn a lot from Malcolm Gladwell, Dan Ariely, behavioral economics. I'm always thinking about what makes people tick, why they do what they do, the subconscious mind, and how messaging and movements are built in spread. So Seth Godin, is definitely one of the inputs and inspirations for my thinking.
Okay, cool. So Seth's been very influential for me because before I read his blog and some of his books, I actually had a very negative view on marketing. I used to see it as a manipulative thing. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of people in the value investing community that kind of shun even promoting anything, that it's bad, and if you're good at what you do, people will just magically hear about it. So I think people like you really, really have provided a service to me to say, oh, wow, it's not bad to market if you do it with integrity.
I'm with you. And
yeah.
I totally respect the opinion of if it's good enough, people should hear and come. But at the same time, I believe in the power of authentic sort of, real marketing, where if it's good enough, then other people should know about it. You can accelerate the rate at which people will come by, thoughtfully tailored distribution of, meaningful messaging.
So you can serve. I feel like there's a big need in the market for people like you, especially with maybe some of these larger brands that have been around for like 100 years. That, at least from my very on the surface, because this is not my field, but from a very on the surface view of how I see it, there's a lot of these, food brands, beverage brands. They've been around forever, right? They've been around for 100 years, 80 years, whatever. And, they were used to an advertising model, if you will, where they just throw millions and millions of dollars on showing people happy using their product. And I feel like our generation is less prone to that kind of advertising. And it, we can see through when people are drinking Coca-Cola and smiling and happy and in really good shape. We know that's not true, that you're in really good shape if you just drink Coca-Cola every day. Do you see that they're kind of needing to alter the way they market themselves, or alter the way that they talk about their brand, or alter their brand? Have you noticed there's shifts around that?
I mean, first, that's just in terms of languaging.
Yeah.
Do I see a need for it? I'm not even thinking about them, because by and large, they're so irrelevant to the businesses and brands and products and services and apps in my life that I actually think about or use, that I think thus, glaring is the need for them to sort of reorient, rethink their approach to engaging, at the very least, the next generation of consumers, which is now becoming sort of the entering the decision-making level and spending level and home of really meaningfully impacting their current and the future of their businesses. I also now think we're in a world where they are starting to now get that themselves, meaning they're starting to realize the urgent need for lots of these big businesses that have been around for, tens or hundreds of years and have been really successful and been able to sort of just ride that wave, are no longer able to coast with some new flashy campaigns for the same products. When every day there's a new, millennial direct-to-consumer startup that's disrupting, or at the very least eating their lunch, right? Using very, very efficient business models, targeting, only through paid performance marketing and just crushing it. And that's happening industry after industry after industry. And so if you're in a big, corporate behemoth and have not at least had your ears perk up, but at the very least had, I hope at this point, several intensive, like all hands on deck planning meetings to future-proof the business through innovation and adapting to, the values and ways of the new consumer, then I would be very worried.
Right. Yeah.
And so on the flip side, for sure, I mean, you can almost think of any category that now has at least 2, 3, but probably at least one superstar direct-to-consumer brand that's offering the same thing with maybe 100-day warranty or like 100-day return policy. Like, it's just people are and those who are in entrenched businesses that have for a long time run without having to innovate will soon, different timelines for different spaces, but come to sort of a point of reckoning. And I hope that they realize that before they do. Or
well, it kind of blows my mind that a lot of these businesses are like, their solution is, well, we're having trouble growing our revenue, so we're just going to start cutting costs and firing people. And it's like, you don't get it.
Yeah. Nuts.
Like, it's not gonna, like, it's like you're gonna get rid of your best people and cut your head count and try to make a shitty model more efficient. Like, that doesn't seem like a long-term solution at all. Like, they're just stuck in a world that doesn't exist anymore.
100%. Yeah, so I'm right there with you.
So have you been able to help some of these larger businesses? I saw on your in your bio when you did some stuff with Mr. Youth, was that what it was called? That you did some brand. You basically help some of these larger brands market to millennials.
So I ran a company called Mr. Youth for a while, which was part of a bigger agency called MRY, which was part of one of the agency sort of holding companies called Publicis Group. And what our group did was basically help global brands understand and engage young people. Mm-hmm. We were doing that through a variety of ways, namely ambassador advocacy and word of mouth marketing, which then evolved into sort of social media before social media became like a whole industry. At Mr. Youth, we were running large scale ambassador and advocacy programs for Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, Microsoft, HP, Spotify, like a bunch of these big businesses for sure. And it was, I think, before this was now, mind you, 6 through 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was really before the urgency level of knowing and realizing that that everyone had to start thinking differently was really upon us. I would say that it only has become abundantly clear to some of those businesses over the past, few years.
Are there any businesses that, I guess a few questions. Did those businesses continue to work on those products or to work on those, not products, to work on those marketing strategies, or was it kind of a one-time thing, or did they get it?
Oh no! I mean, I think at this point, most organizations, at least of that size and scale, have some form of ambassador program, have some form of advocacy program, and now social media really has sort of shifted how that entire world works. Mm-hmm. Advocacy, ambassadors. We used to think about on-campus reps receiving and distributing products and promotions. Now, so much of that is lives through social media.
Like online, like Facebook ads and things like that?
Yeah. Well, not just Facebook ads, but like, quote, influencers on social media, people posting and sharing content. And so the biggest brands, that are still moderately relevant to younger people, even if they're older businesses, are practicing in one way, at the very least, let's say, are exploring. Hopefully, not. I mean, I wouldn't say universally exploring, but most of them are dabbling to some level in these areas, but how it comes to life and what it looks like has sort of evolved over time.
Interesting. Can you talk about maybe a few case studies of larger businesses and how they've changed their model a little bit, marketing wise? What
we're seeing now so I'm sure very high level. Everything that we do now is performance driven, meaning. Let's take there were always loose ways of measuring, overall marketing and then business success, or marketing driven business success. But let's call TV or newspaper. It's imperfect, or at the very least, it's not, granular. So sure, if I spend in these regions and I see a corresponding uptick of X, sales, theoretically, I'll presume that that's because of, the marketing that I was doing. Now we're living in an era where we can track, every movement someone makes online from the first time they see our ad through the maybe 7th, 8th, 21st time they interact with our brand on social. And we could track the consumer journey all the way through conversion and understand where every dollar is going on a cost per acquisition, cost per lead, cost per, anything. And so therefore, the differences, the main shifts in case studies are businesses that were spending either more broadly on sort of interest targeting, or even older models like TV or newspaper or print, and are starting to either fully go into, or at least pivot towards, or at the lightest level test, performance marketing, which means you have a specific suite of assets, meaning advertising, creative assets. Let's call it a video or a post or a blog or a photo, what have you.
Yep.
You use defined target audiences using all of your customer data, lookalike data, which is algorithmically similar to the custom audience that you already know you have, but distinctly not them. You set up all of these sort of targeting and optimization parameters, and then you start running the spend, A/B testing every single asset you're using, and optimizing for the best costs, best targets, best creative, best, et cetera, on an ongoing basis. And so that world, and then there's this, so that's sort of just the initial driving interest through sort of maybe the initial conversion way of thinking. There's something that we call full stack marketing, which is everything from your audience targeting, so how either tools, software, or doing it, in-house, all of the different ways of determining defined target audiences on these various digital platforms. Then there's actually the media testing, so you're A/B testing all of the different creative. You're either using, third-party platforms to buy the media, or you're using straight on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, itself. Then there's, deeper levels of either website optimization, landing page optimization, email optimization. There's all these different, let's call it faucets or levers that your consumer journey goes through. And the modern marketer is basically a scientist that, and an artist, although oftentimes maybe different teams, that are working on putting the best messaging through at different stages of that journey to make sure that we're dropping people lower in the funnel to convert. And on the flip side, the science side is people are, A/B testing and with little magnifying glasses all day, every day in the dashboards, in the platforms, optimizing for the best performing everything. And so that full stack marketing, performance marketing, data driven is the modern marketer's media mix. And what we're seeing is businesses, and by the way, that's how all of the new large, startups that are successful, especially the direct to consumer ones, are popping off. It's because they build that in house. It's a very distinct and critical discipline, and then these tiny little, or at least small, newly funded businesses are able to take on the Goliaths or the behemoths because of just really smart, and sharply applied best practices in digital marketing. And so what we're seeing, and we're starting to see some RFPs from some of these global holding companies that, they do it the way that they've done it for years. They have all of these different brands in their portfolio, but they want to start testing, they want to do a special project, a special test, so that they can learn the direct-to-consumer digital marketing world. And so we're seeing that start to come through. And it's interesting. I mean, I'd definitely rather be on the right side of, history for this one, which to me is no question, performance-driven, data-driven, real-time digital, marketing.
What are some of the behemoths that are doing it right? That are like, wow, other companies should take notice of how quickly they've adapted.
That's a great question. The truth is, I don't have a great answer because I don't think I know off the top of my head people who are doing it right. I think that there's some really great. I mean, I'm sure there are, but it's I can't tell you. All of the media that I get on my feed which is of course highly targeted, highly curated, based on my interests from marketers doing exactly what we're talking about, typically is not coming from big brands.
Well, so that's why I asked you the question, because I've had the same experience. Is I don't know any, personally big brands, because the stuff that I get that I find useful to me is coming from these startups and these smaller, more specialized companies.
Yeah, me too. So it's hard to think. I would say Apple, but I'm pretty sure Apple doesn't really do proper marketing. So,
I'm sorry, what company?
I said I would say Apple, but they don't really do this level of performance marketing. There are some basics that you do see some bigger brands doing. I couldn't rattle off which ones, but there's web retargeting, which is we've all experienced it in one way, shape, or form. You go onto a website, you look at a product, and then that product follows you around the internet for the next week. Right. Stuff like that is, adopted by more than just the coolest, newest, businesses. But isn't it interesting that I actually don't have a sort of off the cuff, boom, these are the ones doing it right. Right. It's almost surprising, but maybe
not.
Also
yeah.
isn't. Yeah.
I mean, if you just look throughout history, the amount of times companies are slow to change when things are obvious because they've been doing something for so long. I was just talking to there's a guy who I interviewed on the previous episode, Scott Forgy, and he's told me before that sometimes when he does a lot of coaching and consulting with companies, and he has told me how sometimes, getting everyone to like take a step back and be like, okay, why have you been doing this for 30 years? Have you asked yourself why?
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me that you can't even think of a behemoth company that, from your point of view, isn't doing it and isn't fully getting it. But so what? So okay, if you were Apple, what would you be doing that Apple currently isn't doing?
So Apple is a very difficult case because some could say they're doing it right. They might not need to do performance marketing because, first of all, they're, I'm sure, unbelievably extensively data-driven in what they do. And for the things that they aren't doing, some could say that so long as they're continuing to sell and grow, then they're fine. But let's use a different example. I mean, just the basics. People need to have active, engaging social channels that offer value additive content to the consumer, right? No one wants an ad anymore. We talk about this world of converged media, which means it used to be that you would have, let's say, a newspaper or a catalog or even a website with your content in the middle and your ads on the side, or right, you have your TV show in here, and then you have your ads in between.
Yep.
Now, as everyone is engaging with most businesses, brands, and media through social media, and all of the content comes through the news feed, right? There is no longer the time where you have it on the side. It's now indirectly in the feed. It's competing with your friends, baby photos and puppy photos and and birthdays and your brands, or not even your brands, but the brands that are trying to get in front of you. And so what we're seeing is this idea that because we're living in this converged news feed where your brands and your puppy photos are all, vying for your eyes and your time, brands need to have interesting, engaging, value-added content that makes people want to stay, listen, read, watch, etc. So that's the first thing. Brands, of course, need to be, on social. They need to be social brands.
Yep.
And they need to be sharing value-added content. The next thing is basic retargeting, basic, analytics parameters, which I hope most of them are.
You would think so, that most of them are doing that.
You would think so. I'm also sure maybe that's not the case. But basic parameters, meaning people need to have the various pixels set up on the website so you can navigate and understand who is looking at what item, and then you can retarget them specific content based on their interests, based on their, based on their the way that they interact with your site and your brand, etc. Everything should be performance driven. We talked about a lot so far on this podcast, but the idea that no money should be spent if we can't in advance understand what we're measuring, what success looks like, what our benchmarks are for success in that category. Like, it's a waste, and it's shocking how many businesses really still aren't living in that.
Huh. Are there things that you think companies should stop doing that they're still doing?
I'm sure. Let's see. Well, first, everything is there is no excuse for anything that we put out to not look beautiful. We're living in a world where people are addicted to social media, addicted to technology. This, by the way, don't condone this message. It isn't a good thing, but just a matter of fact.
Sure.
And the platforms that we use for this are the spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year making it as beautiful, as clean, as minimal, as sticky as possible for the users. And so we literally have become, one of the things that I think you're talking about is this idea of this expectation of excellence. We expect at a subconscious level that everything we interact with, every website, every media asset, every anything looks beautiful, feels light, and is just in line with the rest of sort of the best of the internet. And so one thing that the first thing that I would say brands need to stop doing is anything that isn't beautiful, anything that isn't mobile first or mobile optimized. Like, there's no, especially now when we're living in the world where you can use something like
there's all of these tools where you don't need to be a designer to have beautifully designed things. You don't need to be a developer to have beautifully optimized websites. There's Squarespace, and there's all of these tools that allow you to access that without having to be the subject matter expert. Although, of course, if you know a great designer, they're always going to make it look beautiful, or better at least. The first thing is just brands need to be aware of that, because the first thing that happens if I see an email or an ad or an anything from a business, even if it's a generally interesting business, but I look at it and it's like, and it doesn't resonate with me just in the aesthetics, either the coloring or the fonts or the basic things that just don't look like the way that the best of the internet looks right now, or let's not even say the best, that the baseline of the internet looks right now, then I'm out. I'm checked out. I instantly think that brand or that business or that, organization doesn't understand me, isn't for me, doesn't resonate, is no longer something I'm interested in.
Well, right, because where else are they not putting in the effort, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question for you. What are your thoughts on some of the... Are you familiar with businesses like WPP, Omnicom, stuff like that?
A bit, yes.
Do you feel that they're keeping up with the times? Because I know, just from an investment standpoint, that whole industry, is trading at some of the lowest multiples ever. And I know a lot of these value investors that have actually made investments in some of those businesses expecting that this will be a temporary thing. Do you see those companies in kind of a perpetual decline, or do you think that, through acquisitions and buying up smaller firms, they'll be able to get with the times?
I think it's going to. So the first thing I'd say is I would, paraphrase or pull from some of my conversation with my mentor, advisor, friend, and chairman of both mllnnl and JSwipe, a guy named Matt Britton, who was also the founder and CEO of Mr. Youth, the company that I worked at for 5 years beforehand. Mm-hmm. He thinks and talks a lot about this, and basically any type of really large scale, like big old school agency, even if they're trying to innovate, even if they're, or the agency holding companies like the ones you're mentioning,
yep. Mm-hmm.
It's not looking good. They have such deep infrastructure and such huge ships to sort of course correct that it unless they do some very serious, surgery, yep. It's not something that I would hope. Let's put it this way: it's not something that I would definitely, put money into,
right?
And it's not something that I would see either coming back, anytime soon, or maybe even coming back to where where we would want it to be. And that's because it's for a variety of reasons. One, agencies in general now, lots of the businesses that we were talking about as these sort of newly popping up, hugely successful direct-to-consumer brands, et cetera. These are all building some, most of the agency functions in-house, right? Because if you have a performance marketing team, which is really how most of them are sort of really getting off the ground, you need that in-house because it's so tightly integrated with your product team and your creative team and your, all of these teams sit side by side and go at it in a war room and build these businesses. So the need for traditional agencies, but the need for agencies is shifting. A. B. There's I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk, but as a quote that if you think you're living in today's digital era, if you think you're a shoe company, you're wrong. You're a media business and a shoe company. You're a t-shirt business, and meaning we're living in the era that, as we were discussing earlier, every business really needs to be on social, needs to be storytelling, needs to be practicing these things. And for the most part, if they took the time, and invested enough in figuring it out or building it out, longer term, it would make more sense for them to build that out internally, right? They won't be paying the agency markups of 2 to 3x on the services, and they could then save that spread and then put it into, senior talent to do the very same thing. It's going to be challenging for traditional agencies or the general agency world as we knew it to pivot or iterate fast enough to really keep at the very least at the cusp, if not just keep afloat.
Yeah, that's always been kind of my gut feeling on what you just said, but it's interesting to hear it from someone who knows a lot about this stuff. Do you see companies like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, that kind of infrastructure sticking around for a while?
Yeah, I don't, lots of people will bring up the idea that, well, is Facebook, is that still relevant? The young people aren't using it yet, all of these things. In my mind, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. Facebook has, besides the fact that they've made some very smart acquisitions, of course, Instagram, which is really the primary, most engaged platform, even for the youth, right? Besides that, like they've positioned themselves as now the universal web login. Of course, Google also, join with Google or connect with Google or, connect with Facebook. The more the web adopts that, which in my mind is just going to continue because it's ease, and younger generations want they want life to be easier, more convenient, on demand. I don't want to have to fill out a form. Sure, I'll click a button. Here's some of my information. Take what you need, but make life easier for me. And so the more the web sort of caters to that, the more universal login becomes universal, the deeper they entrench themselves in our future in one way, shape, or form. So I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon. And further, for people like you and me, like Facebook is the main, my main. I don't journal. I don't, blog. Actually, I create content, but I actually create content on Facebook and Instagram. That's what I have every memory and moment that was meaningful to me since, the first days of college, and for, of course, today's younger, generations, even earlier in their life, that's where it all lives. So I'm never going to let it go. Yeah. Maybe I'll evolve and start using different things. Like right now, for sure, I'm more active on Instagram than I am on Facebook. Personally, I don't use Snapchat, but, and I will continue to flow into and through whichever platforms, I find most, exciting or relevant, to me.
Do you think Snap is going to stick around?
It's tough for me to answer because, frankly, I never really got into it. It never really made sense to me. I know that some people who, were really hardcore users, might still use it, but I've also heard people around the office saying that they're surprised how little activity there is currently.
Well, I'll tell you one observation I've made on Snapchat is the last few years there's been lots more advertising on the platform. And there's a whole feed of, little clips you can watch. It's so laggy and buggy, and you want to talk about a terrible, terrible user experience. It kind of blows my mind that a company of that caliber is creating such a shitty user experience for their advertising. They'll come up and they'll say, here's 10 celebrities that did blah, blah, blah. And you click it, and the website's like clunky, and it's hard to navigate.
Yeah, it's very sad for them. Yeah, hopefully they can. Actually, not hopefully. I'm a big believer in survival of the fittest. So if they can then adapt, wonderful. If they can't, should have taken Mark Zuckerberg's offer to buy them out when they could.
Are there other platforms that maybe are less obvious on the surface, but you see continuing to be part of that media infrastructure or marketing infrastructure online?
Facebook, Instagram, we use the same marketing backend. We find generally our best performance on those channels. Google and sort of Google's web display network is also a powerful one. Twitter, it's part of the toolkit, but for whatever reason, for us, everything ends up being as we've mentioned extensively, everything ends up being performance driven, and we've never found as strong performance on Twitter. It always ends up being more expensive for the ads. So that's not really, in it. Pinterest, we consider ourselves.
Is Pinterest a serious thing?
For people who take it seriously, Like I'm not an active user, but there are definitely tons of, moms in middle America who Pinterest all day long, and great. Like that's great for them and for the businesses that want to reach them. And the way that we talk about channels at the office is basically we consider ourselves platform agnostic. And what that means is that some of these, some businesses or some agencies, like the big agencies, they have established like annual commitments to the various platforms that they have to spend, X millions of dollars on, one channel or the other, so that they are, really trying to push you towards spending on this or spending on that. Versus for us, it's all about bottom line performance for our clients. And so we'll include as many of the channels that make sense or seem loosely relevant and then we'll flow the media dollars wherever we're seeing the best, the best rates, wherever we're seeing the best performance, the best conversion, etc. So, we look and consider all, and then flow our dollars to success.
Okay, so a lot of the listeners on this podcast actually are entrepreneurs and do run their own businesses, including myself, by the way, right? What would you recommend for the average, small business owner that wants to be able to market their good or service in a more expanded way than they're doing right now? Have the level of professionalism that you're talking about in terms of beautiful design and A/B testing and everything that you've mentioned, because obviously it's not just reserved for companies with huge marketing budgets. Where does someone who knows how to run their business but may not know a lot about marketing? I mean, they're not. I don't think most of these people are going to spend hours and hours learning about marketing in the way that you have, where it's basically your life. Where do they start? Who do they know how to who to trust? I think a lot of these agencies have you're one of the good ones, but there's a lot of these agencies that are real scummy. Where would where would just the average person running a company even start?
It's a great question, because it's not easy.
It's it's very overwhelming. I'm like, well, how do I start a website? Do I use Squarespace? Do I hire someone? Do I hire a designer? This is a lot of money. Like, what do I do myself? And then the other thing that I found, and I'm just talking about from personal experience, and then people say, well, you can do this yourself. It's like, well, maybe from your perspective, I can do it. If you were me, you could do it yourself, but I don't have your skill set, and I don't want to spend, several years learning to get to your level to do it myself. And I have a full-time job, and maybe I don't want to spend the time to do it all myself, right? Like, yes, I could technically do accounting and taxes myself too, but I have an accountant for that. So it gets weird, and it gets overwhelming for a lot of people, including me.
It makes sense. I would say, generally speaking, I would use the same rule of thumb that one of our developers suggested when we were starting JSwipe, which is, with development in general, especially if you don't know how to code, how do you really know if someone's just talking a big game or really is a great developer?
Yep.
You don't, especially if you don't know how to code. And I've seen many a friend's business, great concept, they had some money to put into it, and then got the wrong developer, spent all the money, didn't get where they needed to get, or they got somewhere but it didn't look or feel good, and then, went under. And that's only because of the wrong person, for the decision on who to partner for that particular piece of the project.
Yep.
And their primary advice was always get a developer that comes through a referral of a developer you trust, right? Like, I would say ask a marketer to, help you find a marketer they trust. Because other than that, marketers could maybe just be marketing themselves, or
exactly,
or falsely marketing, et cetera. And you don't want to fall victim to that, because there are a lot of sharks out there that, aren't really in it to help you, but they're in it to, make as much money as they can. And so I'd say my answer to that would be ask someone you trust, who is in the know, to help navigate, or help select or help vet for you.
Interesting. Before we wrap this up, this has been very eye-opening for me. Before we wrap this up, where, are you sold JSwipe? Was that correct?
Yeah, JSwipe was acquired by JDate about 3 years ago. And
is JDate pretty hands off, or did they change things around? I mean, is JSwipe today what you envisioned?
For sure. For the first 2 years, they were fully hands off. About a year ago, we sort of combined teams, and we're all now, we're all now sharing the same, central resources.
When you say we, I mean, are you still involved?
I am still involved.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Okay. I assumed you weren't. So what's your involvement with JSwipe now?
I still basically do all the things that I had done all along. So I sort of oversee the brand, the marketing, the social media, the community, the events, the partnerships, like everything that has to do with the community and with the consumer is, still my domain.
Well, I will tell you, I don't know what it is, but I thought maybe it was just my experience. It was such a great. I had even before I met my girlfriend, I had a very positive dating experience on JSwipe, even if some of the girls I met before didn't work out. I almost found like the community self-selected to be like, I don't want to sound like a dick, but just more normal. Like the amount of just whack jobs on Tinder was like unbelievable. It was like they all just kind of flocked to Tinder.
It's funny. I mean, I appreciate that. I think that by virtue of someone, using a specific app that is, designated for a particular community, like there's already a level of intentionality that goes into that makes them more likely to be, maybe the type of like either serious or all the things that I think you were sensing and picking up on that.
Right, because if you're going to use JSwipe, you're already saying there's something important values based to me that I'm going to be proactive about. Where Tinder, there's going to be much less of that.
And just in the Jewish community, there's maybe more social accountability because of Jewish geography. You feel like somehow you're connected to them. I think there's a variety of things that go into that, but we have gotten the comment before that, the app, the community is it's either more refined or, more serious or more engaged or more, thoughtful, less, whatever than other apps.
100%. The other thing though with Tinder too was, have you ever actually read their like user agreement and their actual rules?
I have not.
So they pretend like they're not a hookup app.
Well, I mean, I actually believe them, right? In my mind, and that's kind of, it's the idea that they started out just to be a connection app and a tool to connect people. And today's day and age, frankly, there are, especially with Tinder's scale, tens of thousands of people who have gotten, married through meeting on Tinder. My cousin being one of them.
Sure. I guess this is the thing that I always thought was a little strange, was that there's something they might have changed it now, but I think it was like when I read this like 2 years ago, they had a thing where it was like, if you talk about wanting to hook up, if you talk about anything sexual on there, if there was like anything outside of the normal, I'm looking for a relationship, it was grounds to get kicked off the system.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't remember that, but I believe it. Yeah.
And it just always was interesting to me because it seemed like they weren't acknowledging that there was a whole segment of the population that weren't on Tinder for a relationship, and there's plenty of people that were.
Fascinating and true,
right? It's like pretending, right? Because Tinder could be for relationships and hookups. There's nothing wrong with either, but it would almost be like, to me, if I mean, this is to be a very extreme example, but like if Grindr was saying, we don't allow for any kind of talk about same-sex relationships on the platform. Be like, what? I don't. It just it always seemed a little strange to me, the user agreement with Tinder, and it was always very buggy too. That was the other thing. That JSwipe was more efficient and less buggy than Tinder.
Appreciate it.
What's the deal with that? How does that work?
I'm frankly, I feel like we've actually had, early on, we definitely had a ton of bugs, and then over time, we're always thinking about the user experience, but they have different issues, right? Their scale is, tens or hundreds of millions, and we have a pretty defined community. So I have great respect for them. I love what they're doing, and I think that they really paved the way for all of us.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to pit you against Tinder by any means. So I didn't want it to come off that way. But there was always, while I'm on an interview with the founder of JSwipe, it's trying to air my grievances from years prior.
Also, side note, unfortunately, we could take this out, but I got to jump onto a 4 p.m. call.
No worries. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else that you feel you want to say before we wrap up, or?
No, I mean, I love the conversation. Thank you for having me. If any of your listeners, want to get in touch or have questions or, have anything that they want to share, I'm very openly accessible on Instagram, preferred platform, at David Yarus, Yarus, and I'm happy to, answer and help any way I can.
You are a truly extraordinary human being, my friend.
Thank you, sir. As are you, my man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Intelligent Investing Podcast with Eric Schleien. If you'd like to connect with Eric for questions, comments, feedback, ideas, or to inquire about being on the show, please contact Eric at intelligentinvesting@gmail.com. So, in the words of Charlie Munger, I have nothing to add.
So you're ready to ask the biggest question of your life, the only question before that question. How do you find the perfect ring to ask it with? With the incredible selection of diamonds at Jared and our price match guarantee, you can dare to stop searching and find the perfect diamond at a price you'll love. Visit your local Jared store today and dare to be devoted.
We promise to match any price on a like loose certified diamond of the same quality from any other jewelry retailer. See jared.com/price match for details.